What's up, ASCTE? Today I want to show you how to use VS Code and also how to install Docker on your Debian machine, which we'll be using VS Code to do that. So one of the biggest advantages using VS Code is that it can be used to edit files in Linux, which is a very large part of using Linux. And it also supports SSH, which allows us to manage our Linux systems through VS Code. So let's get started with that. And first thing we're going to need is a instruction file that I have put in the class resources under how-tos. There is a file called dockerinstall.md. You cannot open this with your browser, so just go ahead and install it, and we'll open it using VS Code. The .md stands for Markdown, and it's a GitHub proprietary format that uses that's just used to explain how to do things on computers, basically. So it's perfect for this situation. So let us go ahead and open Visual Studio Code. So all right, and then we'll open our Markdown file. There we go. And you can see that it's looks just like that. So it looks like it's a little overwhelming. It looks like it's code, but in reality, it's just a markup language. When it's rendered, it looks like this. So you can see if you hit this little magnifying glass next to the box, then you'll get the rendered version of it. I think it's more, you get more chance of success if you just cut and paste right out of here, which you can see this file starts with some blue text that just tells you what you're going to do. It says we're going to do it in bash, and then this is what you're going to do. So these lines right here are what you're going to cut and paste into your Linux machine. But of course, the problem with using VMware or most any Windows or Linux system in the terminal is you can't cut and paste in here. So we're going to use SSH instead. And just because some of these commands can get very lengthy, and we're not going to want to type this in because it's just going to take forever, and it's so much easier just to cut and paste. So before we are able to connect, we need to find out what our Linux system's IP address is. So we'll use IPA to figure that out. And we'll take note. It is 192.168.23.146. So now that we have our IP address, I will type exit and minimize this. And now I need to install an SSH extension into Visual Studio Code. So I'll click there, and it gives us a little marketplace. And I'll type in SSH, and the first hit is this Remote SSH by Microsoft, so that's definitely the one we're going to want. So it installs very quickly, and you can see once it does install, there's that little Remote Explorer icon that wasn't there before. So good. So now we install that, or we click on that, I'm sorry, and it says that I don't have any SSH hosts to configure, but once I move my arrow close to it, it gives me this little plus button. So in order to add an SSH host, basically all we have to do is type in the SSH command that we're already familiar with, except we have to add a -a to it. So we'll do SSH, my username, my IP address. There we go. And then the -A. So I'll hit enter, and it's going to ask me where do I want to store that, and that could be in the config. So right down there it says that it's been added, which is good. But over here I can click on it, and I can right click, and it asks if I want to open the host in the current window or a new window. I'm going to suggest a current window because I want to cut and paste a lot in and out of this Markdown file into my Linux system. So I'm going to connect there, and it's going to ask for my password. It says enter password for C. Crosby, so type that in. And down here it shows that SSH has been established and that I am now connected to this system. So at this point, I'm going to want to open a file in order to get my instructions back. So if I go to open file, the first thing it's going to ask is which file, because it assumes I want to open one on my Linux system. But in reality, I want to open one that's local, which I mean on my Windows system. So I'm going to press this show local, and I'm going to go back and open my Docker install. So I have that again. So now I want to start entering these commands. But almost like magic, my SSH prompt is hidden down by this purple bar. And if I just move my mouse and I pull it on up there, boom. Now I have access to my Debian machine, and I have all the instructions right here needed to enter the commands in. So the first thing I want to do is make sure I have sudo properly installed. So let me just do a sudo ls to see what happens. And it works. So if it didn't work, you would need to type in apt-get install sudo and hit enter there. Oops, you have to spell your install correctly. There you go. You'd have to hit enter there. And then after that, you would have to do a user mod -ag sudo and then your username, whatever your username is. And hit enter there. And then you have to log out and log back in. So if you don't have that done, those instructions were at the end of the last video, but I suggest you do that before we move on. So for all those who have that, these instructions are pretty straightforward. So the first thing is I want to make sure I don't have any old versions of Docker lying around. So I just right-clicked in this Debian terminal to get that. So it says, good, couldn't locate anything. All right, well, let me make sure that my updater is up to date. So I got that. That's good. Now I'll just scroll here and I will cut my first, or I'll copy my first group of software packages I need installed. So it says it wants to install 16 megs, so I got that. All right. This is actually 2 commands. So I'll try to update the file, but you take the first one there. You need to make a directory, which is pretty easy. And then I need to download a GPG key and install that. And that's just so that the computer knows that this app store is legit. Because what I'm doing is I'm adding Docker's app store to my Debian machine, so my Debian machine can install software from the Docker app store. So I'll take this command, which is one large command, and I will put that down there. And as long as you get no feedback, you should be good. And finally, I will do a Docker apt-get, or I'm sorry, a apt-get update. And if I see Docker's App Store, then that means everything went good, which is you can see right here I did. All right, so then the next one is I want to install all this Docker software. So I'll put that in there. I want about 464 megs. So that will take it a second. All right, so that's finished. So next, I want to install Docker Compose, which could be done just appended to this last command, but I have found more success in installing it separately. So I'll install that. That will be yes. All right. And now Docker is a service, so I need to run this systemctl command, which just enables the service. So if I ever shut down my Linux machine, Docker will start up next time it reboots. And I also need to start the service this time, so I don't have to reboot my machine. I can just start it. And finally, I need to actually run Docker, so I'm going to promote myself to the root user. So now I'm root, And I'm going to type in this, or I'm going to enter in this Docker hello world, which is just a test container to see if everything's running properly. So let's take a look at that. It's going to download it, and it says hello from Docker. This message shows your installation is working correctly. So as you can see up here, if you do see that message, then that means you've done everything correctly. So from this point, Docker is now installed. You can see its help menu by typing that, and it tells you everything you need to know. You can type in Docker PS as a list of running containers, and PS-LA to list all the containers running and not running. So there's that. And yeah, so from there you now have Debian with Docker installed, and you'll be able to install the DNS server on this Debian machine very quickly, just using VS Code. And of course, to exit out of anything, you just commonly just type in exit, and let me get rid of that. And I think down here, if you go to your Remote Explorer again, you can, how do you disconnect from a box? There we go. You click on that green box there, and it says close remote connection, and now you're disconnected. And just to prove that everything went well, we can pull this back up. Let's see, Crosby, my password. And we can type in, we have Docker now installed. So that's how you use Visual Studio and its SSH feature. And it's also how you set up a really neat environment where you can just cut and paste commands into a Linux machine from Studio Code very easily, and even more easier than actually using a Windows terminal that's SSH'd in. So good luck with this. Let me know if you have any questions. Thanks a lot, ACT.